Hi guys, my name's Danny Morris, and this is just a short presentation to describe the findings of my thesis for the University of York. So last year I visited Saipan to investigate public perception of marine protected areas in the Northern Mariana Islands. So just to give you a bit of background, Saipan is the largest of the Mariana Islands inhabited islands, with a population of around 47,000. It has a diverse range of ethnicities, which makes it ideal for the work that I was doing, as you'll see shortly. Because of its location, like many of the Micronesian islands, the Mariana Islands are surrounded by coral reefs, which means that there's many vulnerable and endangered animals which are important to protect. So this photo on the left here is taken in Lau Lau Bay. It wasn't actually taken by me. Unfortunately, when I was in Saipan, the corals were much more bleached, a lot of them were dying due to the warming of the oceans, but the structures were still there, and they were still home to many endangered species including turtles, sharks and even whales. This was a photo that I took down at the beach, and as you'll know, you can go almost anywhere on the island in the morning or evening, and you'll see people fishing like this. Many people depend on the ocean for food, as well as just fishing for a hobby, for fun. So it's very important to protect the oceans to ensure that people can continue to enjoy the benefits and the food that the ocean can provide. So the main method of protection so far that Saipan has been using is marine protected areas. Currently around the Mariana Islands there's 7 smaller coastal marine protected areas, as you can see in this picture. So there's 5 of these no-take areas. These are the red areas, as you can see here. 3 around Saipan, 1 at Tinian and 1 at Rota. There's also 2 limited take zones. So this means that fishing can still take place, but a specific species is protected. So up here near the lighthouse, it's the sea cucumber and it's the trochus down here. There is one more protected area which has been somewhat more controversial, and this is the Marianas Trench Marine National Monument. So this MPA is massive. It's almost 100,000 miles squared, which makes it one of the largest protected areas in the world. So to give you an idea of the scale of this protected area, the 7 smaller protected areas that I just showed you a minute ago, they fall within this green dot here. This is Saipan. So you can see the scale of this protected area. So like I mentioned, it's just under 100,000 miles squared. It was established by George W. Bush in 2009 by presidential proclamation. And it's divided into 3 main parts, so I'll just explain these now. There's the trench unit, which is this dark blue area running up here. This protects the submerged lands of the Marianas Trench. It runs almost the length of the trench. There's also the island unit, which is this yellow box here. This protects the 3 northernmost islands from fishing. And then there's the volcanic unit, which are these red triangles dotted around. These are important volcanic geographical features on the seabed, so it just protects those. You'll notice I've only called it the 13th largest protected area in the world, not the marine protected area, and that's because only this yellow box here, only the islands unit, is actually a marine protected area. The rest doesn't protect the water column, only the seabed, so you can still fish in the volcanic units and the trench unit. So this was a classic example of the top-down approach to marine conservation. The order came from the top, with George W. Bush signing the proclamation to create these protected areas. And at the time it divided opinion over equity and ownership. So people questioned whether America should be allowed to impose protected areas like this over arguably cultural lands. So although records show that these trips were rare, cultural fishing trips did occasionally take place up to these northern islands, and people were understandably worried that these may be affected. So as you can see here, people used to sail up from Saipan to the northern islands to fish around them before sailing back down, often to share and sell the fish that they caught. Because of these concerns, the proclamation was amended to allow traditional indigenous fishing, so locals can still fish around these northern islands. So what were my research aims then? Why did I visit Saipan? Well, first of all, I wanted to explore public opinion on the nearby marine protected areas. That's the 7 smaller marine protected areas that I spoke about earlier. I then wanted to compare these opinions to the Marine National Monument and try and find out why people might view the monument differently to the other marine protected areas. And finally, I wanted to make recommendations for the future management of protected areas around Saipan. So, how did I do this? Well, I interviewed 253 people whilst on Saipan, taking approximately 15 minutes per survey, although this did vary quite a bit. And it was a semi-structured survey, so it had a range of questions from closed to open. I approached people randomly in the busiest areas of the island to try and get a wide range of respondents. And then I analysed the data using the appropriate statistical methods. You'll see these later on as I cover what I found. So results and discussion, what did I find then? Well, before we get into that, I'll just cover some of the survey demographics. So you can see that Chamorros were the largest ethnicity that I interviewed here on this pie chart on the left. There was Filipinos and Carolinians who also had quite a big share, as well as many others. The age groups ranged from 18, which was the youngest that I interviewed, all the way up to one gentleman who was in his 80s, so there was a nice distribution of a wide range of age groups. And again, the men to the women ratio was good as well, a nice even split here. So if you think back to my first aim, it was to explore public opinion on the nearby marine protected areas. Well, when I asked people how important they thought it was to protect Saipan's oceans, the vast majority of people rated it the maximum importance on the scale, so 5 out of 5 here. So this was encouraging to see. People think it is very important, in general, to protect the oceans. When I asked people if they thought the protected areas were adequately protected, 63% of people, on the left here, said they didn't think there was enough protection, so almost 2/3 of people didn't think there was enough. 1/3 of people, just under 32%, said they thought they were adequately protected, and 5% were unsure. And when I asked people if they'd like to see more, the same, or less marine protected areas around the Mariana Islands, 66% of people said they wanted to see more marine protected areas. 27% said they thought the same, it was okay how it was, and only 7% said there should be less protected areas. I also asked people what percent they thought should be protected, so if they were choosing how much of the ocean around Saipan would they protect, and the average that people responded with was 57%. So people think that over half of Saipan, the CNMI's ocean, should be protected. Just to emphasise this point, the current level of protection is about 4.3%, obviously much lower than this 57%. So opinions on marine protected areas were overwhelmingly supportive. People really supported their presence, and the majority of people thought that not enough was being done. So this is encouraging in terms of marine conservation, because people want to see more marine protected areas around the CNMI. So my next aim was to find out opinions on the Marianas Trench Marine National Monument. So the logical first question was whether people had heard of it. And as you can see, 68% of people had heard of the monument and were aware of what it was. 32% hadn't heard of it. So this is just a reminder that quite a lot of people, almost 1/3 of people, just weren't aware of its existence, didn't understand anything about it, or just weren't interested. So this is just a good reminder that people, that not everyone is engaged in this sort of thing. I then asked people if they supported the monument, and this was quite surprising, but again, the majority of people said they supported it. Quite a few said no, and a few were unsure. The majority of things that you read online about the monument is when it's been controversial, in the news or debated for some reason, but it was encouraging that still the normal people on the streets of Saipan were very supportive of the monument overall. But this figure shows how it was actually more controversial than the smaller marine protected areas. So I'll break this down for you to make it easier to understand. So first of all, I asked people whether they thought marine protected areas were positive, neutral or negative on the economy in Saipan. You can see that the majority of people chose the option of saying it's positive on the economy. A lot said it was neutral on the economy as well, and a few said negative, but not very many. I asked the same question for the culture, so whether they thought it was positive, neutral or negative, and again you can see the majority said that the marine protected areas were positive on the culture for Saipan. Quite a few thought neutral, had no effect on the culture, and again a few, but not many, said negative. And when I asked it for the environment, you can see that by far the majority of people said that marine protected areas are beneficial for the environment, so we would expect this kind of response. A few said neutral, and again a few said negative. Later on in the survey though, I asked the same question, but worded for the Marianas Trench Marine National Monument rather than marine protected areas, and you can see opinions changed quite a bit. So the majority of people started saying it was neutral for the economy rather than positive. The majority also said it was neutral on the culture here, and the number of negatives increased quite a lot from what people thought protected areas had. And again, environmentally, although positive remained the main category here, there was a lot more neutrals. So you can see opinions did change when asked about the monument as opposed to marine protected areas. These changes were significant as well. So support for the monument remained high, although it was more controversial. It did tend to divide opinions a bit more. People were more strongly opinionated in one direction or another. So why might we be seeing this? Why are people more opinionated over the monument than the marine protected areas, even though in a lot of ways they are effectively the same thing? Well, when I broke down some of the findings into the subgroups, we might get a clue as to what we're seeing here. So on the left axis here is the percent of people who said that they supported the monument, and then these are the ethnicities along the bottom. You can see that although support remained high, above 50% in all cases, the Chamorros and the Carolinians had significantly less support than the other ethnicities. Again, when I broke it down into age groups as well, we saw a similar trend. So as you move up through the age groups here, you can see that support falls. So why might we be seeing this? So if you remember my second aim, it was to compare the opinions to the Marianas Trench Marine National Monument, which we've just done, and explore why people are viewing the monument differently. So the open questions gave a bit more of an insight into what we were seeing here. So it allowed people to talk more freely rather than following set questions. And the idea of equity and ownership over the land around CNMI played quite a big part in guiding people's opinions on protected areas. So although people supported the CNMI protecting their own waters, a lot of people were worried that the monument might have had more of a political motivation behind it. So it was suggested by quite a few people that George Bush signed this protected area into place right before he left office to leave a presidential legacy so he looked good on the international scale without having to worry about much of the consequences because he was leaving office shortly after. A lot of people were also concerned about cultural identity being lost, so this may explain what we saw earlier with the Chamorro and the Carolinian attitudes being more critical of the monument, as well as some of the older generations. They're worried that these protected areas might stop future generations from fishing where they have fished when they were younger. As I explained earlier though, this is kind of it's a misconception. So the proclamation was amended to allow traditional indigenous fishing. The trips were rare anyway, but it was amended to allow fishing to still take place. But a lot of people didn't realise this, which is where some of these concerns might have arisen. And if you remember my final aim, it was to suggest the most suitable approach for the future management of the monument as well as the other marine protected areas. So moving forwards then, what do I suggest? Well, there's a few points here. First of all, in my opinion, the CNMI need to better convey the benefits and the successes that the monuments bring in. A lot of people that I spoke to simply said that they hadn't heard anything about the monument, apart from when it was being controversial. But people wanted to hear what was happening with it, if there's any scientific research going on there, if it's benefiting the biodiversity, things like this. Something like a visitor centre would be a good way to do this, but so far nothing like this has arisen. Second, there needs to be better representation of the local people on the advisory council. So currently the advisory council that helps guide the direction of the monument includes just 3 officials from the government of the CNMI, and it's very difficult to get a representative input of opinions from so few people. There should be much more residents from Saipan on this advisory council. Third, the CNMI should continue to demand co-management of the monument. So Hawaii is another area which also has a large marine protected area, but in Hawaii's case it's cooperatively managed by 3 different groups, and this includes Hawaii itself. This is something that's come up a few times in past debates, but the CNMI should push for a similar co-management deal. Currently the CNMI only has consultation on the monument. It doesn't officially have co-management. So something along these lines would also be very beneficial. It's a little way off yet, but it's something that they should continue to push for. And finally, there should be a completed management plan put in place. So Hawaii, like I mentioned with their large marine protected area, they had a management plan published after just 2 years. The CNMI still hasn't had it published, and this is almost 9 years later. And something like a management plan would give the monument more direction, more focus, and it would allow people to see where the government wants to take it and the benefits, again, that it will bring. So finally, it's worth noting that although I've focused on some of the more critical points here and how the monument and the protected areas can be improved, it's worth remembering that throughout my research, support for the protected areas, and including the monument, was exceptionally high. It was surprising how much people supported protecting the oceans around the CNMI. As well as this, the overwhelming majority of people wanted the CNMI government to do more to protect the ocean, and they said this wasn't only for themselves, but for future generations to continue to enjoy the resources that it provides. So thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed hearing about my thesis. If you have any questions, feel free to email me on the email address on the screen now.